We'll go ahead and get started. If you want to admit everyone, Whitney on Zoom. Thanks for joining our session. I know this topic seems repetitive, but I think it's a really nice recap somewhat of what Victoria shared with us, but more so what we did at Seattle Colleges as we were learning about affirmative action. So my name is Annabel Cholico. I'm the scholarships director, and I have the honor of working with...
Hello, I'm Jasmine Meraz. I am one of the scholarship managers, and Winnie Nelson is our newest scholarship manager in the back. She is almost 2 weeks in, so she's learning with you all as well.
Yes. And I would love, since it's such a small group, I'd love to hear what schools are being represented in the audience. So what?
Sorry.
Everett. Olympic? Okay. We have my Seattle Colleges folks.
Tracy. No. Ciela, Evans College. Danielle, Green River.
Edmonds.
Carol, with Peninsula College.
Skagit Valley, awesome.
Rose, welcome.
Welcome.
And from
Highline.
And then Bates Technical College.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. We are lucky enough to serve our 3 campuses across the district, so we administer scholarships for all 3 campuses, Seattle Central, North Seattle, South Seattle. We have one application that all of the students at each campus apply to. Last year we received 1,200 applications and we awarded 513 scholarships. We aim to award each student $5,000, but the average was about $4,300 to $4,700. So every year our goal is to increase the number of students that we're able to award and also increase the dollar amount that we're able to award to them. This is a really hard time to be in when we're being told what we can and what we can't do, what to be mindful of, who you can and can't serve directly. And I say that also from like my personal values, being a brown girl, first gen from the east side of the state. It's hard, but I think that there are still ways to support our student populations through the scholarship processes. So our AVP, DeAndre Fisher, in a community conversation said, you know, we've been here historically before in some shape or form, so we just have to figure out how to move forward. And I think there's other ways to support students to make them competitive, right? So if you're telling me I can't use BIPOC or I can't do this, then I'm gonna be sure that our students are well supported through our scholarship process so that they are competitive on paper, so that they know how to write those statements, they do some community engagement. So we have to think about how we can be advocates for the students while we have to be compliant. We are lucky enough at Seattle Colleges to say that no matter what, by default, we will continue to serve students from the first generation class, from particular ages. Almost 80% identify as students of color. So by default, I feel really honored to be able to serve these students, even with the affirmative action changes. But I know that this is not everyone's reality across the state. Victoria did a beautiful attorney job of walking us through the affirmative action and how it is that we got here and how this is trickling down to scholarships. We joined the team in 2022, 2023. So we function by scholarship cycle. So this is our 3rd scholarship cycle. So I'm like, I've been here for 3 years. And this was the topic when we came on, and it shocked me. I thought, oh no, what did I sign up for? I love supporting students through scholarships. And it was something that was starting to happen. And the OCR complaints were happening to our neighbors in Seattle and folks literally in our backyard. And as a scholarship director, I really felt a responsibility to learn about this topic, because you then have a responsibility to keep your foundation compliant. If I wasn't doing that, then I felt like I was being negligent to the information that was coming to the forefront. So that, Carrie had done amazing work and research and had been staying on top of this, but when we came in, it was time. It was showtime. 2 years ago, it was showtime for us, even though right now it feels like it's really showtime. So how did we get started? We were both really overwhelmed with what it meant. We had inherited Award Spring as our platform. We're learning how to award students, and now we have to learn about the legality behind this topic. How many of you have attended National Scholarship Providers Association Conference, NSPA? Okay, I feel like they need to be our sponsor because we learned that that was who was really up with all the news. NSPA is made up of folks that administer scholarships at different institutions across the nation. And we were adamant about going to their conference because we knew at that time that the conversations were going to be around affirmative action. And we wanted to know, are OCR complaints really happening across the nation, or is it just something here in Seattle? We're progressive, we're a target. And we went, and there were folks from all over the nation, Florida, Oklahoma, East Coast, that were speaking to their OCR complaints. So we attended their conference, and it was essential for us to fully understand everything that Victoria presented. The Title VI, Title IX, donor participation. We needed the literature and the knowledge, and this conference really provided that for us. And to this day, it's a platform. You can sign up for a membership for your entity, and there are constantly articles around the changes, around affirmative action, OCR, all the good stuff that I think we as scholarship administrators need to be up to date on is there. So I highly, highly encourage you all to attend. On Tuesday through Thursday, February 18th through the 19th, we will actually be partaking in their virtual conference. So anything that they host, we attend. I think it's $79 per member to attend, but it's something that, as we have to stay compliant, that's where we get our information from. Their next conference is in Atlanta, so our scholarship managers will attend and bring more resources and information back to us. So what did we learn at NSPA? Victoria shared a lot of information that we received. At that moment, we had met with Penny, who is one of the partners at Stolen Reefs, and I felt like a stalker at NSPA. We had a flight to catch. She was doing one of the last sessions, and I told Jasmine.
Session.
Yeah.
Closing after lunch, everyone was leaving.
Yeah. But I'm glad we stayed. I said, Jasmine, if we miss our flight, oh well, this is what we came for. So we learned about laws, taxes, ethics, and scholarships. What we are going to share with you all were the takeaways that were important for us that triggered the red flags. As we were a new team, we were like, oh no, we do that. And I heard a lot of gasps in the audience today with things that some of us may still be doing when Victoria was like, you probably shouldn't. That's how we felt. We were gasping. I was falling out of my chair when I was learning from Penny, like, oh no, we still do that. Donor participation was a big key takeaway for us, because there's fund agreements and gift agreements that are formed with them. They help establish the criteria, but I think historically we may have been giving donors a little too much leeway, a little too much power in creating those criteria points, and we learned that they could help establish those, but they could not cherry pick and choose their candidate. At that time, we had interview committees where they would come with their family of 4 and they wanted to interview student candidates, and it was really hard to keep them compliant with a rubric. Following a rubric, you would see a lot of bias very present. Like, they're gonna choose based on who they may want to showcase that they funded, maybe by how a student looks or how they sound. So this was a huge red flag for us. We learned that donors cannot formulate the entire committee. So if they come with 4 family members, your foundation needs to come with 5 members. So in total, you would have 9 people reviewing for their scholarship. That was acceptable. So we learned that and we brought it back and we established it. Again, they can't control the decision, so having folks from your foundation or reviewers helps those folks on the committee follow a rubric. And again, it's a recommendation that they're making. They are not making the final decision. You as a foundation, as an administrator, make the final decision on the candidate selection. So donor participation was huge. This can get very intricate with DAF policy, which I'm not super familiar with, but something to also look into.
I'm so sorry to ask a question so early.
It's okay.
It's about donor participation.
Yeah.
What can like work?
I can give you this one.
You just have to like hold it.
Okay, so it's not even, okay. All right, we'll do this. I have some supervisors who I've had this conversation with a few times.
Yeah. Thank you, Mandy.
I've had this conversation with a few times, and the answer I get is, well, going forward, I guess we won't do this, but we have a couple donors who are grandfathered in, and they just get to, and I'm like, they aren't even, we have donors who they don't agree with our anti-racist mission statement.
Sure.
So they refuse to award a student, and they haven't awarded one in the entire time I've been here.
Mm-hmm.
And they get to pick, but they haven't picked, so we don't award them.
So the money's not going out.
Yeah. So this could be a leader thing. How do I have a conversation about like, this is the problem. We have to stop doing this.
Yes.
And then not get the pushback of, well, it's okay for some because they've been doing it. So I'd love to have that conversation.
Sure. That is part of this conversation, and Tracy's gonna tap in and share how those conversations have gone, but I will say that resonates with us. We have same type of donors, and it took a lot of work to take them from doing this interview committee where they're gonna cherry pick and convincing them to become a reading committee, like I explained. And Tracy, I think in a few minutes will definitely be able to give you guidance on how to initiate those conversations and how to help the donor understand that they may have to meet a compromise with you to be able to award their dollars. Otherwise, they become bookshelf dollars like Victoria.
But also my supervisor.
Oh, that's even bigger. That's hard. And we'll talk about that too in like a next slide, because we weren't taken seriously when we brought this back by folks. So I'll get to that point in like 2 slides.
Yeah.
We learned about restrictions and requirements, and this is constantly an area that we have to review and assess. One thing we learned is that your restrictions need to be broad enough so that they can live long enough without having to go back and make revisions to gift agreements and fund agreements with those donors. So we'll give a few examples, but you know, sometimes you have a donor that comes and they want a specific student, specific gender in a certain program, and they don't want them to be an international student, and they can put up all these roadblocks. So again, how do we communicate with them that the more roadblocks you put, the less likelihood is that we can award that? So we brought this piece of information back to our team because it was gonna be beyond us to be able to change that. We learned that we needed to focus on setting requirements that are acquired instead of inherited. And that has been our rule of thumb. So acquired, you can't be a participant in, for example, we have Project Baldwin, who it's for men of color. You can be a student who participates in their Emoja Club, a student that participates in any type of club at your institution or is taking a certain class or in a certain program. And you can also use geographic locations. So zip code from this county, from these high schools. The rule of thumb is that you want to steer away from using inherited characteristics. So inherited being Mexican American student, we have scholarships for female Asian students only. What else do we see, Jasmine?
Anything that encompasses like very, very specific. So it's like, has to be a female, has to be over the age of 21, and has to have taken accounting 234, 235, and 236. Well, part of those conversations with the donors is, all right, how about maybe they have to be an accounting student?
Yeah.
Like, you know, so it's like you're still
Broaden
taking
it.
something, but you're removing that has to be a woman or a female part to be like, well, we're still taking into account the accounting part, just not everything else.
Yeah.
But we had some that were very,
Quite a
very
bit.
specific. Where it
I
was,
think we have one that's for an Hispanic student, and that's an old gift agreement, but it was broad where it changed to a student who was open to helping influence and make changes in the Hispanic community, and that could be anyone. Right now is obviously, you know, the time where we have to be mindful of race and gender, and it's really hard to figure out how to do that and how to continue to serve students from these populations. Last year, I was willing to take the full risk. Fine, we'll do BIPOC, we'll take the risk, and our leadership was on top, was on board with that. And then this year, just last month, that conversation changed, and that really, really triggered us to think about how we were gonna make the changes. So this criteria piece feels like it changes every month. It's always something new. Even hearing Victoria today, I was like, oh no, do I have to go back and assess citizenship, resident status? So if it's not one thing, it's another. But these two, I think, are the place where we can all start. Yeah. No, you give me a chance to breathe and take a sip of water.
Related to your last slide, sort of, how do you handle athletic scholarships that are particular to not just a soccer player, but a women's soccer player, a male soccer player? Is that a part of this?
That's not an area that we're familiar with and have to do. We don't have an athletic department, but Victoria spoke to it yesterday in the executive session, and it seems like what is it, the NWAC. And you may recall as well what she mentioned. So it seems like NWAC has its own policies as to why an athlete can't receive additional scholarships if they're receiving a scholarship from NWAC, right?
Right, because part of it is for recruitment of athletes. And so, and the way they are supposed to set them up is they say, okay, you've got 11 scholarships you can award to female soccer players. We've got 11 scholarships you can award to male soccer players, 8 male basketball players, 8 female basketball players. Those are separate from the general scholarship process. They are not part, they're like not commingled. Those waivers and awards are different. If the students want to apply for general scholarships as well, they may, but their athletic status doesn't factor into that. They're just part of the general student population at that point. So they did kind of keep that as a separate. Yeah.
So go back to that, so that way people can hear if they're on, it's as long as they're essentially an equal amount of scholarships per the sport based on whatever sports your college may have. So you have a male soccer team and a female soccer team, you have 8 scholarships and 8 scholarships regardless. So whatever that balance may be.
Anyone else in the room administer scholarships to athletes? Do you want to share?
We have a scholarship that is, it's really broad. There's supposed to be half of the scholarships go to professional technical degree, half go to students with academic excellence, and then 2 of those have to be for a student athlete. So it's very specific for that specific donor. There's another that is an issue I'm learning from this slide that is supposed to be for a female student athlete specifically. So we'll need to figure out how we award that one now.
So while at this conference, like I said, I gasped for air and we learned we needed to come back and really assess the risk. And it's something that you constantly have to do while we're in this climate. You have to continuously assess the risk. I learned that there's no such thing as no risk. There may be high risk, medium risk, and low risk, but there's no space for no risk, and that made me really nervous. Another metaphor that I learned from Penny at Stolen Reefs, right? And we can clean up everything and it looks great online, on the web page. Award Spring looks good to the public eye. But if OCR comes and they pull the curtains back, what are you doing behind the curtains? Is that also cleaned up? And I think we realized there were some things that were still happening that shouldn't be. So our focus was really to clean up anything that was happening behind the curtains. And I think, you know, when we talk about what you can promote on your website, that kind of alludes to this a little bit, where you can, I wanted to ask this question, I think someone from Highline did. So if I take it off the website, but I have a paper printout in my office, or I just share the information verbally, like is that compliant? Like I'm always thinking of like what can we and can we not do? But we learned that we had to come back and we had to assess the risk and what are we administering that has really high risk and really low risk, and what out of all of these fund agreements could trigger an OCR complaint. We also learned that we needed to look at the universities to see what they were modeling. So if there was an OCR complaint, it wasn't going to come to us, it would come to the Seattle colleges. And I remember joking with Carrie, but not joking. I said, well, if the OCR complaint comes, who's named on it? Is it me? Is it you? Is it the president? And that also shook me up a little bit to learn about how serious OCR complaint can be from the top to the bottom. So we came back knowing that we needed to look over our fund agreements, no matter how many there are, and I think we have over 200 or so. And we had already started to do some work, but now I knew what I was looking for: high, medium, low risk, red flags, donor participation. Now it's gender and race, and now I'm thinking I have to go back and look at citizenship. So a little bit about the steps that we implemented when we got back from the conference. We informed the entire team, because to this day, folks will not believe the severity of this until you get an OCR complaint. So your supervisor not believing it, or other team members, it's very real. And it's also sometimes disheartening, because you're like waving your arms like it's serious. It's happening. We have to do something. And some folks feel like we don't need to until we get an OCR complaint. But there's much more liability. Like, knock on wood. I'd rather the OCR come knocking on my door and I've cleaned up everything than to not have anything. Like everything be a mess. That's scarier to me. So we came back, our leadership was on board, our board of trustees. We had done some work around this, but you're always gonna have someone that is like doubting the information you're bringing and they wanna hear it from the source. So I was really happy to know that we were gonna work with legal counsel, and Carrie, our leader, would be able to share that with folks. We came back and we dismantled the interview committees, which was really hard, and it was really hard on a personal level as well. They're historical donors who specifically award communities, historical communities throughout the Seattle area, and it was hard to deliver the news, but we started having those conversations with them, and we continue to have them to this point of we still want to honor who you are hoping to award, but there's some changes, and maybe we can meet at this halfway point. So this meant no more interviews. This meant they would go participate in a reading committee. Do you want to share what the reading committee is like?
So essentially, some of our donors also participate in our regular reviewing period. So all of the 1,200 or 1,300 applications, they only review about 5, right? So it's really not that many. But in part, we have a reading committee that, like Annabel mentioned, if it's 4 of them, there's 5 of us. And so it'll take part of the foundation team. So if they bring 2 members, we have 3 automatically. It'll always be Annabel and myself, or just myself. And then say maybe Tracy, say maybe Nick, whoever is available on top of that, based on how many reading committees we have. And so currently we have, in this past cycle, we had 4. And I took part of 3 out of the 4, but they're really not that bad. And it's still high candidates, right? So regularly in the regular pool, they would have still scored high. They still would have scored 25 out of 25 points or 24 out of 25 points. And so we know that they're still getting the top 90% percentile of the students who are within the program or interests of students that they are looking for, but yet they don't know who these students are, which then goes back into what we'll talk about, some of the changes we made for it. But essentially it's just, they see the statements, so it's just another read of the same statements. What we review as general reviewers, same statements, just another pair of eyes, another score.
Yeah. And I think they did feel a little comfortable with folks from the foundation being the other people that were gonna diversify the reading committee. Like they had a little bit of trust in that, it wasn't just anyone. We also learned that we had to discontinue administering anyone else's scholarships. So at one point we used to administer scholarships for another agency, and we learned that we shouldn't do that unless you control the funds and unless you own those fund agreements and those gift agreements. It wasn't recommended for you to administer anything that you didn't have control of, because that essentially there's risk in that. And we also stopped promoting external scholarships. So a lot of times, and I'm sure you all experience this, where folks will email you and say, can you distribute this to your students? We get asked for, even from staff and faculty, they want the list of student names because they want to offer them different scholarships or point them out to different scholarships. We're still trying to navigate that piece, but what we have started to do is we forward that information to a team of funding navigators that exist at each of the colleges, and they're Title III funded, and that's their project. So their goal is to help a student piece together their funding for the next 4 or 5 years. And we just forward it to them because we wonder if maybe they have a little bit more protection than we do, since they don't administer, they just share information. So that's usually what we do, or in a Zoom appointment, if they ask for any other scholarships, you know, we verbally say, check out this, check out WSOS, or do a search here, but we no longer share anything on our website, and we don't have a listserv. We used to have a listserv where we would put links to everything and it would go out, but we learned that our neighbors got an OCR complaint over that.
We also don't advertise our scholarships, like on our foundation website, so like the names of them, we also don't, or any of their requirements for the same reason.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it's just general, apply, but we don't list out the name or the purpose of each scholarship. Aside from that, we came back and I knew we needed to organize our fund agreements, and I needed to read through all of them. And this sounds tedious, but each year before the annual cycle, we will review and read all of our 200 agreements. And I do that because things are changing and I need to be sure that I didn't miss anything, or if there is something new that I should catch, that I catch it. So there may be a system you can come up with that's better than that, but I sleep better at night if I do that. So reviewing fund agreements took obviously collaboration and partnership with folks on our team. And I worked closely with Tracy Russell, who's our Executive Director of Planned Giving. And when I came back, I said, I can't do the conversations with donors. That's like not fully my area, but I can be there. And Tracy and I kind of game planned how we were gonna have those conversations, but I wanna give the mic to Tracy so she can share with us, and I think it could help answer the questions that we got. One, how do you get folks on the same page, whether it's your supervisor, but also the donors? Like how do you have these hard conversations? Hi, Tracy.
As if we don't know each other well. I just want to get a sense though, because there's so many, when you have smaller shops, you do multitasking in different areas. So can I just get a sense, who would actually be the ones talking to donors who are here today? Like raise your hand if you're the one, okay.
And who administers scholarships? I'm the executive director, I'm a staff on one side. But I'm trying to hire one more person.
Yeah.
And that person will get more than that. I'm the foundation. But we'll double in size soon.
You're like uber generalist, like queen of generalists. Okay. I don't want to bore anybody, but inevitably, I guess I'm going to start like high level with just a couple of tips. When we started tackling just the committee process, just by numbers, we had 15 that we knew were in a problem area. We got that down to 4, and those 4 that were problems converted to this reading committee. So we're really in the clear, but simultaneously, we are not offering that to anyone else. And when you start you have these conversations and discussions about this, the reason I bring up the fundraisers is selling for the gift involves these deep conversations with people and what the donors want versus the administrative side. And I just cannot stress enough, you can't have unilateral conversations about this, because ultimately it's the one facing the donor who's going to have to go back and sort of disentangle it, sometimes with scholarships, sometimes without. But I want to do a role clarity here. I viewed it as the fundraiser's job to do that. This wasn't an easy thing. I mean, it wasn't easy at all. But if you are relationship focused, if you're donor centered, that's of course where it is. And if it made sense, then Annabel would come along, because we have donors with varying understandings of why we do what we do. Multiple questions I wouldn't want to have to answer in, wrongly. So there's that. I also want to say this, what was helpful when I embarked on that. So again, 15 down to 4. I would sometimes, Carrie's back there. Okay, I worry a lot. And I worry. And sometimes I'll front load situations with more alarm, maybe than they need. so
Just a little bit more.
I know. But the thing is, don't assume how they're going to respond. don't over-inform if they're not really driving you there. Stand firm, stand tall on how you are there to try and meet donors, absolutely donor intentions, you're gonna honor them, but also manage the colleges and the student interests as well. So it's that delicate balance. So I will say, I was pleasantly surprised by a couple of them and completely thrown off guard on others. And so just don't go in there pre-programmed, but go in there realizing that you might have to change up your talking points and do so. And then that leads into the next tip. Honestly, it's listen more than talking, and I know this is like beat up, but the fact is, if you get them talking on what they care most about, it ends up opening up all these options about how you can try and get that halfway point, or even a better understanding. Next tip. When it comes to supervisors and leadership, which of course we had 100% backing the whole way, but what I would suggest is that there are a couple of different perspectives to offer to supervisors and leadership. And that is, first of all, they get to choose their risk tolerance. But the question is, do they have all the information they need to make that decision? And so what I would suggest is, you look at it from the donor deduction standpoint. You are putting the donor charitable deduction at risk. These types of behaviors, particularly with the committee, if they are viewed as choosing the students, you are literally, I would argue, putting the trust of the foundation and the donors at, it's just a different perspective. If you know, like I said, donor centered, you would then want to make sure that you are honoring their charitable stuff as well. So that's one perspective that might work, might not, I'm not sure, but the other piece that we ran into were what donors wanted and expected from students once awarded. And it was often those that had the special committees that would ask them to go do it. Look, you're all shaking your heads like I'm not making this up. I'm feeling so normal right now. By the way, I didn't set up these committees, so I inherited them. Just want to say that right now. So what I would suggest is then it became a conversation potentially. Again, these are talking points that could affect your leadership or even donors. Is students are at risk of taxable income if they are actually doing things in response to. So I've used this, not often, but I have. And donors don't want that. I mean, they don't. So it's not like I'm pulling out these red flags all the time, but it is a different perspective than just what we're talking about here, which is affirmative action and all this assault on, DEI and everything. So different people pay attention to different things, and it may persuade, that way. I would say, change how you combine. What did I want to say? Was there a question? I think there was a question. Did I answer there's a second question. I got the one on leadership. Was there another one? Okay. I'm going to go through an example, and sometimes it's easier to hear an example. And what I'm going to do is flip the script a little. And she alluded to it, Annabel alluded to it, but I think what we're focusing on is typically the white identified donor who is struggling with what's happening in their community and who they're wanting to serve. In our case, I can give you a couple examples. The one I'll focus on is this. You've got a picture of an African-American family, only lived in an African-American community. Nephew is killed tragically by violence. Wants to set up a name scholarship in their nephew's name. This is an African-American male who is studying at Seattle Central. So they are not interested in serving someone other than an African-American male. And I'm going to go the distance on this one because, again, you got to listen. Their interest was then split further in that they wanted someone essentially who they defined as African-American, not from Africa, or their history back how many generations. And you listen and you hear people have different definitions of things, of who they want, and their values, etc. This was such a sensitive conversation. It is not the only one. We have a second one, African-American family who wants to serve an African-American male and female. So 2 scholarships. So you've got the intersection of gender, you've got intersection of ethnicity, and we had a committee for this one too. And so it's this evolving conversation, and the first conversation, did she yell? She did, yeah. And it's okay. I mean, and it's not that they didn't think it might be coming. It's that it was an exception made for so long, why now? And the institution that we are aligned with is a college institution that receives public funding, federal and state funding. We are not a standalone nonprofit. If we were, the board of directors could choose how they want to proceed. We have to align with the interests of the institution, meaning the foundation can't put the institution at risk, the college institution shouldn't put the foundation at risk. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. I say this because this family went on and actually established their own nonprofit where they're not necessarily going to, and I encourage them in this direction because they would not be under the same scrutiny and they can choose their own risk tolerance. So they didn't like what they were hearing, but at least I could give these sort of pointed, conversations about this. This is when Annabel went with me. And Annabel was able to try and figure out how could we get to the target audience in ways that were okay. And so it would be like things like participation in Emoja, participation in Project Baldwin, mentorship programs deliberately targeting male, African American, if not others. They chose not to do that. So in other words, they would have increased the likelihood that they would have been serving, can't promise it, but they would have increased the likelihood that they would have gotten who they wanted, but they were not into that. They were towing the line. She then wanted more statistics about the breakdown of African American versus African descent. However she defined it, which by the way was not how the institution defined it, because when students are answering this demographic information, it's statewide. I mean, it's all very consistent. I went to the statistics folks. I got that data for her. I showed it to her. Didn't like it. You know what I mean? Because you can go back to you're not recruiting well enough or whatever. It goes all over the place. But my point is that it was this back and forth that lasted a while. Nobody was really happy necessarily. Well, guess where we're going now? We have to go back and address the gender and the ethnicity piece. We've only addressed the reading. So I spoke to them to let them know we were thinking about this, that we were actively engaged with an attorney. I gave them this more advance notice than I did anyone else. We are literally at the position where we're not going to administer things unless the gift agreements are revised. So we have a timeline. It's April 9th, literally. I have to have this, re-signed kind of thing. I don't know what they're going to say. It's not going to, I don't know what they're going to say. But I will say this, I am not, I think my posture is not apologetic as much as descriptive. Because I do think there's shared values. Whether the objective will actually be met or not, I don't know, but there are shared values. Difficulty with this one, and I think you're going to have the same. There are probably 1,000 donors who gave to this. It is a family who signs the gift agreement. So the money is from many, many people, and it was solicited under a very particular kind of thing. So all this to say, it's going to be an evolving conversation. I expect she's already gone there. I want the money back. These sorts of things. But I think our position, at least the way we seem to be moving through this, is it's describe, give time to think about it as much as possible, set the boundaries, and realize there are non-negotiables. And the more you say that up front, the less it becomes a negotiation conversation, and frankly, it deteriorates into disrespect to them. If you think that they have power, or let them think they have power that they don't, that we know we're not budging on, I feel like that's the donor relationship right there. We will erode integrity. It won't be recoverable. So I feel very strongly that the fundraisers' relationships are really key to this, and that there are times to bring a scholarship, but you guys have your own stuff you got to do. I'm not trying to trample, but I cannot encourage this enough. I have to be well informed to be able to talk, or I will. Fundraisers have a tendency to just go where the donor wants to go. And it, in the end, does a disservice to both the institution and I was going to say I'm oversimplifying things. Maybe I'm not, but it is complicated. And that is a different conversation I'm having with someone else, and a different one from that one, and a different one from that one. And now
I actually just kind of wanted to
sort of respond from the scholarship admin perspective, and I'm mostly just agreeing with you, which is that for me, actually, what has been really helpful and really important in the last 2.5 years that I've been working with admins is actually getting my fundraisers to talk to me about what they're trying to get. When they come to me and say, I'm gonna get X amount of money and this is how we have to administer it, I have to say, we can't. Legally, we cannot do that. And also, there are sometimes the ones that we get that I'm like, ethically, I just won't do that, actually. So having me as as a scholarship admin, because it is part of my job to keep up on compliance and understand that part, as opposed to part of my fundraiser's job to do that, actually helps all of us, I think.
It does.
So my experience has been that it is really helpful for myself and our fundraisers and the donors for me to be included in those conversations as much as possible. Obviously, I don't need to be at every single meeting or anything like that, but when it starts to come to the time where we actually talk about, well, what do you want here? What does this look like? What do you, what requirements are you looking at? Having me there helps. I would encourage people to, try and get in on those.
Thank you. I love that you are part of a broader conversation. Just to echo, Tracy, what you were saying about having those candid, respectful conversations with donors and giving donors the deference that is needed to have an honest conversation. Seroptimists in our community is really, really active and very engaged and very frustrated with the fact that they want to support women and we're telling them we can't do that. And it's really, really hard because, we can align with what they're trying to do all we want, but we can't, where our hands are tied. And having those conversations when they're saying, well, we're thinking about setting up a new scholarship, will we be able to do this? And saying, no, we won't. You may be best not gifting it to the college and administering it yourself. If you want to have this control,
That's right.
and you want to have this relationship with the recipient, and you want to be able to do this and this and this, your funds are best left with your organization and not investing them with the college. And that's, as you say, when there's a disconnect between who's doing the fundraising and who's doing the implementation, they can be just so focused on get the gift agreement, close the gift, get the funds, and having that conversation that says we're not the best home for your funds is, it's hard, and it's the right thing to do. And as we can see, it puts pressure on people who down the line are having to clean up these messes. And that's not fair to our coworkers either. So I just, thank you for having that conversation.
Thanks for your reflections. And the example that Tracy shared about that particular scholarship really also, on top of like what we have learned at NSPA, really helped us think about like, okay, well, what can reviewers see where they're gonna try to piece the mystery on like what ethnicity is this student, because we wanted to be sure that all students were going to be considered regardless of what boxes they were checking. So Jasmine's going to speak to how we had to clean up a WordSpring. Do you all use a WordSpring? Is there someone in here that isn't using a WordSpring? What do you use? Washboard. How about you? Okay. Kaleidoscope.
I'm trying to convince my board that we should invest in, since we don't have like a person who does this, like a WordSpring could be helpful.
We could have an entire session on a WordSpring.
Yeah, that's
like
a whole
the
other thing.
I've got my own piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really quick, I want to say I'm investigating Scholarship Universe.
Awesome.
Run by Lucian, and there's like regional reps.
Okay.
She's from like Virginia, but I don't know.
Scholarship Universe.
They were
Got it.
at NASPA.
Yeah, all these folks tend to show up at NSPA trying to sell their products. So Jasmine will tell you how she had to clean up award spring and the application, and actually a recent cleanup that she did to be sure we were compliant with everything that's happening right now.
Yeah. So yes, award spring and I are besties. They are not always the best. I mean, they do what they need to do, right? I get it. But they're not perfect by any means. So kind of the first step after all Annabel talked through of what we need to do on the donor side, on the award spring side, what we started to do is blinding items, which is an option that you all have. And because of these reading committees who wanted to be very specific, we want to make sure that only the super important parts that are actually notable to the reading committee or the scholarship, which are our written statements. We actually also eliminated one of the written statements because we had a purpose statement, a personal statement, and a financial need. We actually removed the financial need statement because the assumption is if the student is applying, they are in some kind of need. Regardless of what other scholarships or grants or loans or whatever else they may be getting, all students are in some level of need. So we removed that. We added more word count to our the other two written statements to give students the opportunity to tell their story. We always advertise students to never feel the need to trauma dump on their written statements. We don't want them to essentially exploit themselves into something that they may not be comfortable for the sake of money. That is the last thing we want from students. And so even in the blind items, we are blinding student names because historically we have communities who have converted from one religion to another who may partake a new name. I'll use an example. My partner is Muslim. They don't practice Islam anymore, but they have a Muslim name. So the assumption is that they're Arab, but they are a Cambodian person. And that is very hurtful to communities who may be in those same realms. So we wanted to eliminate that altogether. Also, any demographic information that's not relevant to the application, so name, address, email, phone number, transcript that may show their name, anything other than the written statements.
But we can see it,
But
right?
we can see it as administrators, yes.
I'm just curious, we do that as well, we blind them, but I'm noticing in the essay themselves, and we have,
Yeah.
Yeah.
783 completed applications.
Right.
I can't go through and blind things out, and I'm just setting up a reviewer training session, and so I wanted to put some essays together for, to demonstrate, and I went through, so I set myself up as a reviewer group, and I got 18 applicants, and I go through, out of the 18, only 7 of them did not have their name in the very first sentence.
Yeah, so what we do as we go through and that's the main talking point to all of the programs on campuses to do these presentations, and often is, we don't need to know your name, we just want to know your story. So I'm like, those are the things that we want to highlight is who you are as a person. What has your story brought you to the specific college or the specific field? So we'll often talk about that. It's like, yes, you can talk about your family. Yes, you can talk about your background. But let's tie it back academically. So our big goal is academically, what are you trying to do? In your life, what are you trying to be? What brought you to this point? And highlighting that instead of just whoever their name is. And most of our students do a really good job of not mentioning their name on the statements themselves. But that's because we also overemphasize going to the writing center, meeting with the peer, reading it out loud to themselves. I'm like, if it doesn't sound right when you say it, or if you kind of cringe a little when you're reading it, something's obviously wrong.
We were also just finding that reviewers would like open their list of applications and they would see last names and immediately they'd be like, well, I'm probably not gonna read these, or I'm gonna score them low because they're more than likely they don't identify as such. So we're hoping that that helps a bit. I think we had one reviewer that was like, I have 14 students and only 3 of these are probably acceptable. And I thought, yeah, here we go.
Well, so it sounds like you do a lot of outreach, but I mean, we should try to do a lot of outreach, but I know that a lot of the students, so when I do the same thing.
Yeah.
When I do a presentation, I do helping it, it's written right in your instructions.
It's gonna happen.
Yeah.
It's gonna happen.
So there's a lot of students that don't have that privilege of having outreach, so they don't get those steps.
Yeah.
And so that's also something.
Yeah, so on our website, we actually have a list of all of the questions to consider in our statements. Nowhere does it mention to write their name. So it's all questions that can help them write the statements about themselves without them outing their name or outing their identity or whoever they are. Of course, students are still gonna do it because it's who they are, right? We have a lot of students who are international students who are, you know, first gen, second gen, refugees, who to them their name is their full identity. It's who, you know, their ancestors passed that name on and has such a high importance to them. But we try to make sure that as much information as we can hide from them.
Yeah.
But yes, same thing. We have, you know, last year we had 3,000 and something applications total, regardless started or completed at some point, but we only had 1,200 that were completed. And a lot of those is the names, or it was too much information. So it's hard to pinpoint them, but a lot of reviewers are actually really good on our end to notify us of a conflict. And so reviewers will email me and say, hey, I can't review this person because either I know them or I'm having some conflict. I will rearrange it to somebody else. And that's how I've kind of gone about it when we go into the review portion. I don't know what time.
Reference, we're at 3. Okay. We have like 6 minutes.
References, yes. We removed references from our application. It is no longer required. We noticed that there was a lot of bias in references as well. They're not recommendation letters, they were reference forms. So it was still like A through Z, you know, 1 to 5 kind of thing, but we still noticed that it was still the same thing, that it was creating bias from reviewers. Reviewers were scoring students who had references versus students who didn't, or if they had someone who they knew professionally, they were always weighed higher than other students. And we have a lot of students who just have to go to class and leave. They don't have the ability to make connections and network with professors, instructors, mentors, advisors. And so we actually put in a blurb in award spring stating that we are not requiring it, and the reason for it. We've also made communication with our staff, our district-wide staff, letting them know references are not required. And then as we do the reviewer training, we also stated we are no longer requiring it because it just wasn't doing that much good, to be honest. And then last thing is the opt-in, opt-out. So removing conditional things in our post-acceptance. So students have the ability to choose the things that they want to be involved or not be involved with after they're awarded or during the initial awarding that happens. And so they can choose the level of involvement, whether that just means going to events that we put on or that the college puts on, networking with donors, so being in a social environment with donors, using their statements or their stories for publication. They're okay with their publications but leaving their names anonymous, so their story is fine to tell, but they don't want anyone to know who they are. And then altogether don't want any form of involvement whatsoever. And so all of this is not conditional, so students can opt in or opt out. And as publications or, you know, our communication team wants things, we will look into those lists, and those are the students we will make sure are kind of firsthand, like, oh, we know this student said that they're okay with all of these things. Same, making thank you letters optional, which I know is also a big thing. And instead, we are asking students to do student bios that indicate the things that donors would want. So what are they studying? What are their plans? You know, and most bios still thank the donors to some extent for the scholarship. And then a photo of them, which is also optional. And that's it, yeah.
I'm going to speed through the last few slides just because it's through 12, but we will be here after, and then we're here through tomorrow. So if you have any questions, and then we'll also share our PowerPoint. So steps that we are continuing, we're going to continue to support all students. I love saying, like, when I get challenged, well, are you going to support undocumented DACA? Are you going to support students of color? We support all students. Everyone can apply. We will continue to work with legal counsel. It's something that you know, Carrie has supported. We're so grateful for it because every time we hear someone speak from Stolen Reefs, we have tons of follow-up questions, and I think in this climate, we need to. We'll be adapting scholarship requirements to changes, probably in the next few years as well, adjusting questions in award spring. We're continuing having conversations with donors more than once. Editing our fund agreements and our gift agreements, super tedious. It takes a lot of time, a lot of patience, a lot of collaboration with fundraisers, and we're just learning and evolving. And I wanted to just share, like, what does doing this work look like? This is just a little snippet of a piece that the attorneys at Stolman Reeves were able to help us put together that serves as like talking points for fundraisers. But I have questions on, can I use underrepresented? Can I use first gen? Socioeconomic status. So they helped us put a little sheet together. It's still in draft mode. These are examples. They're not templates because something like this would be tailored to your foundation, and it may not look the same for your foundation. So this is one piece that is still in the process that we hope can help everyone on our team learn and understand how to have these conversations. When folks ask us where did we start and how do we track changes, this was our very basic way of tracking everything at first on an Excel sheet. This was the easiest and the simplest way. I know there's platforms, but this is how we started. What's the fund name? What fundraiser is assigned to it that scholarships needs to work with? Let's identify the areas of risk right now. And these were some that we started off with, right? Ethnicity, gender, age, the language in the gift agreement that perhaps needed to be changed. Did this need a change in order for me to administer it? Yes or no? That was gonna tell a fundraiser whether we were gonna be able to get their money out the door. So right now we've given an April 9th deadline, make as many changes as you can. That's when we start matching students to dollars. Our notes, attorney notes. Over time, this has grown and it has several columns now, but this was our starting base. We had some questions. I love that we've been able to answer some, but if you find that you still have a question, we're here in this room and we're happy to connect here and even after the conference is over. So thank you for sitting with us for an hour and 15 minutes. This concludes. This is just a plug for our scholarship. So I don't know if you all have students that are transferring to the Seattle colleges at all. Our application is open. You can take a picture if you'd like to share.
It's also available on our foundation website in case you want to send a flyer to anybody.
Yeah, that's all. Thank you. Thank you all so much.
It is 3:15. I think the next session starts at 3:30.
Okay.
I think. 3:45. JK.
And then
3:30 and 3:45 is transition. We stay in here.
Read my
So I guess we can still. I mean, if we have still another 15 minutes, we could ask questions. Are there questions on the chat?
Oh yes. Sorry.
Oh, go.
Like it just popped up.
Okay.
Go.
Someone said, thoughts on any walks of scholarships?
Oh.
We ask the question if they, so anything that we ask, we tend to ask for internal data, but we ask students if they have filed for financial aid, WASFA, and do they plan to. But aside from that, if we have a student that reaches out in an info session in their WASFA, we accept them. Like all students can apply. I don't care what color status, they can all apply. So that's a privilege that we have. So we haven't had to navigate any intricacies with WASFA.
We also, it's part of just data and reporting, so it's not something that we, like, they have to apply to FAFSA or WASFA in order to be eligible for our scholarships. We don't account for them because our financial aid team, and everyone's financial aid office may be a little bit different. Ours runs in tiers, and so they will prioritize grants and like WSOS scholarship first, and then our scholarships. And then every quarter, so it's not just per the year, every quarter they'll say, well, the student doesn't have any unmet need this quarter, but next quarter they will, and so then they will award the student the dollar. So we have some leeway of navigating it. We do work with the financial aid office, but we don't require them to complete it as part of our application.
Anything else on there? No other questions?
Okay, cool.
Yes. And it's okay if folks want to get up and utilize, it's break time, so we're not offended.
I just had my first criteria request for it to be within 4 years of completing their high school education. And today in the earlier session, she talked about age discrimination. So I was just wondering if you guys have any thoughts on that.
We've had the conversation with the attorneys about that, and it seemed like that was an area that we would need to consider, but it wasn't one that had attention right now. And the reason was is that you could make a case for why it needed to be age specific, and we have, I think, 2 scholarships that are age specific. And the argument that I would make for ours asks for students that graduated
specifically to a Seattle public school.
But in like the 60s or
Yeah.
70s, so it's trying to capture returning non-traditional students. So we learned that right now, with some risk, you could have age, but you need to make a case for why.
The other thing that we do too in checking is to check the average age of our applicants. And so for us specifically, our average age is 29. Yeah, we have students that range from 13 to 64. And so it's like, yeah, you can make the case for like 18 to 24 specifically, but if your demographic of your college is showing that these students are older, it's like, well, why wouldn't you just spread the age range even larger if you're gonna have less students in that age range, unless that's what they want. We have a couple that it's like, has to have graduated from the Seattle Public Schools within this many years. Yeah. So, it's a low risk
But
on
it's
the
a
scale,
risk.
but it's still a risk.
Cool. Thank you all.
Well, the next session is at 3:45, so you're welcome to stay here, or you can take a break. Do what we need to do, get some coffee, some soda, some tea.